All right, so today we're going to be diving into some pretty fascinating territory and potentially controversial too. We're tackling this whole relationship between pro-Black rhetoric and interracial relationships,
Yeah,
particularly when it comes to Black men.
right.
So, it's something that I think a lot of people have, strong feelings about. A lot of different opinions out there.
Yeah, definitely a topic ripe for exploration.
Exactly. And the source material today is going to be a YouTube video. It's called Black Men Love White Women But Hate White Men. This is by a commentator who goes by the name Hammer. And we're going to unpack his claims, try to understand, all the nuances of his argument, and see if his conclusions, really hold water.
Sounds good.
Uh,
It's important, I think, to be clear about what we mean by pro-Black. I think for this discussion, we're using it to describe individuals who are actively advocating for the betterment and empowerment of Black people. But, it's also crucial to acknowledge that this term can have varying interpretations,
mm.
which I think adds another layer to this deep dive that we're about to do.
Absolutely. So Hammer's central argument is that there's this noticeable trend of Black men proclaiming pro-Black stances while simultaneously, engaging in relationships with non-Black women,
Right.
primarily white women.
Yeah, and I think, this observation really forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the complexities of identity, social hierarchies, the lived experiences of Black men trying to navigate these often conflicting landscapes.
Right. And Hammer claims that this trend exists for a couple of key reasons. The first being that for some Black men, white women represent a status symbol. Now, I know that term can be loaded, but stick with me here.
Yeah, it's crucial to understand this perspective within a historical context.
Yeah.
Think about it. Centuries of colonization, systemic racism have created this global power structure where white men often sit in the top, holding a disproportionate amount of socioeconomic power.
Right. And Hammer argues that this unfortunately trickles down to perceptions of white women.
Right.
He suggests that being with a white woman can be seen consciously or unconsciously as a way for some Black men to elevate their own social standing within a system that has historically marginalized them.
It's a thought-provoking argument. And I think it highlights how historical trauma can shape perceptions of desirability and even influence our understanding of what constitutes success.
Okay, that's one side of the coin. But Hammer's second reason delves into the realm of beauty standards.
Right.
He argues that globally, white women are often presented as like the epitome of beauty. And, well, you can probably guess where he's going with this.
Right. The media plays a significant role in perpetuating these Eurocentric beauty standards. For decades, movies, magazines, even advertising have reinforced this idea that white features are the ideal. And this messaging sadly permeates across cultures.
Right.
It's not just about individual preferences.
Yeah.
These preferences are shaped by powerful societal forces.
So it makes you wonder, how can someone develop a healthy self-image when they're constantly bombarded with messages that prioritize a specific type of beauty? And then how does that, in turn, influence who we are attracted to? It's like we're all swimming in a sea of societal conditioning.
Absolutely. These influences are often subtle, operating beneath our conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And yet they can have a profound impact on our choices, including who we choose as partners. It's a topic psychologists and sociologists have been grappling with for decades, and there are fascinating studies exploring how implicit bias shapes our perceptions and actions.
This Achilles heel argument of his really gave me pause. He claims this pattern, if true, creates this unique vulnerability for Black men, making them more susceptible to manipulation and betrayal by non-Black partners.
Right.
He uses the recent example of actor Jonathan Majors to illustrate this point, interpreting Majors' relationship with a white woman as a factor in his downfall. It's a sensitive case with many layers, and Hammer's take is definitely one interpretation of the situation.
Right. And what's intriguing is how he ties this back to the film Get Out.
Yes.
Which explores the darker side of interracial relationships. I mean, it's a brilliant film that taps into those anxieties and fears that can exist within interracial dynamics. But it also raises important questions about whether it's fair or even accurate to place blame solely on the woman involved.
Right.
These situations are rarely black and white, and assigning guilt based on race alone is incredibly dangerous.
For sure. And Hammer doesn't stop there. He then argues this whole dynamic damages the credibility of the pro-Black movement as a whole.
Yeah, he believes it feeds into harmful stereotypes about Black men and their motivations. He suggests this perceived hypocrisy makes it more difficult for Black men to effectively advocate for Black empowerment, when some are seen as prioritizing personal gain over collective progress.
And that, in turn, can create friction within the Black community itself, especially when Black men voice criticisms of Black women.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Black women have legitimate reasons to be skeptical of such critiques, especially given the history of Black women being judged and marginalized based on Eurocentric beauty standards.
So how can we have these difficult conversations without resorting to blame or shutting down the dialogue entirely? It's like navigating a minefield of historical baggage and cultural sensitivities.
Right. It's crucial for Black men to approach these conversations with a deep understanding of the historical context and with genuine empathy for the experiences of Black women.
Mhm.
Open, honest, and respectful dialogue is essential, but it has to be built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding.
This is where Hammer's proposed solution comes in. He calls for a clear distinction, what he calls a line in the sand,
Yeah.
between genuinely pro-Black men and those who are using the label for personal gain. It's a bold statement, to say the least.
It's definitely provocative. He believes this separation is necessary to maintain the integrity and effectiveness of pro-Black advocacy,
Right.
arguing that without this clarity, the movement will continue to be undermined from within.
But it's a slippery slope, right? Who gets to draw that line? And what criteria are used to make that judgment? Are we venturing into the dangerous territory of purity tests, which have historically led to exclusion and division within social movements?
It's a valid concern, dividing people based on their personal choices, especially when those choices are rooted in something as complex as love and attraction, could potentially do more harm than good. It raises questions about what constitutes authentic pro-Blackness,
Yeah.
and whether such a rigid definition is even possible or desirable.
And this all plays out against the backdrop of what Hammer identifies as a broader societal resistance to these relationships. He argues that it's not just the Black community that disapproves. Non-Black communities, especially white communities, often push back against Black men being with their women.
It's fascinating how these relationships can challenge deeply ingrained social norms and power structures.
Yeah.
They disrupt the traditional hierarchies that have long governed our society, and that disruption can trigger a backlash from those who benefit from the status quo.
So it becomes about more than just individual preference, doesn't it?
Right.
It touches upon these bigger societal anxieties about race, belonging, and power.
Precisely. Interracial relationships can be seen as transgressive acts that defy the unspoken rules and boundaries that have long defined who is supposed to be with whom.
Right.
And those transgressions can evoke strong reactions from all sides.
Wow. We've only just scratched the surface here, but this is already proving to be a pretty deep dive.
It's just the beginning. There's so much more to unpack. But I think we need to pause here and let you, our listener, absorb everything we've covered so far. What are your initial thoughts on this conversation? What resonates with you and what makes you uncomfortable?
We'd love to hear your perspective. This is a space for open and honest dialogue, so don't hold back. Let's continue this exploration together.
Okay, so we've laid out some pretty heavy stuff, this historical baggage, social conditioning, and Hammer's controversial call for a line in the sand. I think it's easy to get overwhelmed by all these different angles, but I think that's precisely why we're here to kind of unpack it all in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, and remember, this isn't about, finding simple answers or pointing fingers. It's about diving into the complexity
Right.
and understanding how these seemingly personal choices are actually deeply intertwined with larger societal structures.
That idea of a line in the sand really stuck with me. It's such a bold statement. And while it might be tempting to just dismiss it as impractical or even divisive, I am kind of curious to explore the intention behind it. Yeah, I think at its core, Hammer is grappling with this issue of authenticity within the pro-Black movement. He seems to be expressing a frustration with what he perceives as hypocrisy. Individuals who espouse pro-Black rhetoric but engage in behaviors that he believes contradict those ideals.
So it's almost like he's yearning for a more concrete definition of what it truly means to be pro-Black.
Right.
One that goes beyond simply talking the talk, but also walking the walk in every aspect of life, including personal relationships.
That's a compelling interpretation. And it raises some fascinating questions. For example, who gets to decide what constitutes authentic pro-Blackness? And what criteria should be used to make that judgment? The danger, of course, lies in creating these rigid litmus tests that could end up excluding or alienating individuals who might otherwise contribute meaningfully to the movement.
And that's precisely where the historical context becomes so crucial, right?
Right.
I mean, throughout history, social movements have often grappled with these internal debates about purity and orthodoxy. And those debates can sometimes become more about policing individual behavior than about achieving collective liberation.
It's a pattern we see repeated across different movements for social change. There's often a temptation to establish a hierarchy of commitment,
Right.
with those deemed most pure holding more authority or influence. But such hierarchies can be incredibly damaging, leading to infighting and undermining the broader goals of the movement.
And when it comes to pro-blackness, it's especially important to remember that this isn't a monolithic concept.
Right.
It encompasses a wide range of beliefs, perspectives, and experiences. To reduce it to a single set of rules or expectations would be a gross oversimplification.
Absolutely. Pro-blackness can manifest in countless ways. It's about challenging systemic racism in all its forms, whether that's through political activism, economic empowerment, cultural celebration, or even simply choosing to live your life in a way that affirms the dignity and worth of Black people.
So while Hammer's call for a line in the sand might stem from a legitimate desire for accountability within the movement,
Mm.
it's crucial to approach this conversation with nuance and the recognition that pro-blackness is not about conformity, but rather about a shared commitment to dismantling systems of oppression and creating a world where Black people can thrive.
And that commitment can take many different forms. There's no single path to liberation, and each individual's journey will look different. To try to impose a singular definition of pro-blackness would be to ignore the richness and diversity of the Black experience.
And let's not forget, Hammer also points out that disapproval of interracial relationships extends beyond the Black community.
Right.
He argues that non-Black communities, particularly white communities, often harbor their own resistance to Black men being with their women.
This brings us back to those deeply ingrained social hierarchies and the anxieties they provoke. Interracial relationships, especially those involving Black men and white women, can be seen as a direct challenge to the historical power dynamics that have long defined our society.
So it's not just about individual prejudice or preference. It also taps into these larger fears about shifting power dynamics and the potential loss of privilege for those who have historically benefited from the status quo.
It's a reminder that racism isn't just about individual bigotry. It's also about systems of power that perpetuate inequality and maintain the dominance of certain groups. And those systems of power can manifest in subtle and insidious ways, including the social norms and expectations surrounding dating and relationships.
It's like those unspoken rules that dictate who is supposed to be with whom are often rooted in these deeper racial hierarchies.
Mhm.
And when those rules are broken, it can trigger a backlash from those who feel threatened by that disruption.
And those reactions can be particularly intense when it comes to interracial relationships involving Black men and white women.
Yeah.
These relationships can evoke a potent mix of anxieties, stemming from historical baggage, cultural stereotypes, and even subconscious fears about the perceived loss of white female purity.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of a very complex onion here. What might seem like personal choices about love and attraction are actually deeply intertwined with these larger societal forces that shape our perceptions and behaviors.
And it's important to be aware of those forces, even if they operate beneath our conscious awareness. By understanding how historical legacies, social conditioning, and power dynamics influence our personal lives, we can begin to challenge those influences and create a more just and equitable world.
So let's bring this back to you, our listener. We've covered a lot of ground, from historical context to social conditioning to the anxieties surrounding interracial relationships. What are your thoughts so far? What resonates with you and what challenges your assumptions?
This is a space for open and honest dialogue. We encourage you to engage with these ideas, to question your own biases, and to consider the multiple perspectives at play. This is how we learn and grow together.
We'll be back in a moment to delve even deeper into this fascinating and often challenging topic. Don't go anywhere. We're back, and, I hope you've had a moment to kind of digest everything we've discussed so far. It's a lot to unpack,
Yeah.
but, I think it's essential to have these conversations, even when they're uncomfortable, because
yeah.
they push us to confront, some deeply ingrained societal norms and beliefs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Avoiding these topics only serves to perpetuate the status quo.
Yeah,
And, we can't dismantle systems of oppression without first understanding how they operate,
right.
even in the seemingly personal realm of love and relationships.
And while Hammer's video might be controversial,
Yeah.
I think he deserves credit for sparking this important dialogue.
Hmm.
He's forcing us to grapple with the complexities of pro-Blackness identity and the ways in which, our personal choices can intersect with these larger societal forces.
Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, he's raising questions that deserve our attention. He's challenging us to think critically about the ways in which race, power, and history continue to shape our lives,
Right.
even in the 21st century.
And that's what we strive for in these deep dives,
Yeah,
to encourage, critical thinking and open dialogue, to push beyond simplistic narratives,
right.
and to empower you, our listener, to grapple with these complex issues on your own terms.
We're not here to provide easy answers or to tell you what to think.
Yeah.
We're here to facilitate a process of exploration and discovery, to highlight different perspectives, and to create a space where these conversations can happen without judgment or fear of reprisal.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Hammer's video and the questions it raises, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to ponder. Given everything we've explored, the historical context, the social conditioning, the power dynamics, and the personal experiences,
Yeah.
how do you view the relationship between personal choices, pro-Blackness, and the dynamics of interracial relationships?
It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
But I encourage you to sit with this question, to explore it from multiple angles, and to allow yourself to wrestle with the complexities without feeling pressured to arrive at a definitive conclusion.
It's about acknowledging the nuances,
Yeah.
the gray areas,
Right.
and the messy reality of navigating these issues in a world that's still grappling with the legacies of racism and inequality.
And it's about recognizing that this is an ongoing journey, not a destination. We're all constantly learning, evolving, and striving to understand these complex dynamics more fully.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity and given you some food for thought. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep engaging in those uncomfortable but necessary conversations.